There is a moment that happens in the wild that almost no one who experiences it ever fully processes in the time it is occurring. You are on a trail, or on a ridge, or moving through a drainage at the edge of dusk, and something shifts in the quality of the air around you. Not a sound, not a movement, something older than either of those. A pressure, a wrongness, a sense that the space you are occupying has changed its nature without any of its visible features changing at all. And then you look up, or you look sideways into the branches of a tree above the trail, or you turn toward the rock shelf overlooking the switchback you just climbed, and it is there. It is looking at you with a stillness so complete it seems almost geometric. It has been there, in many cases, for longer than you would like to calculate. It has watched you approach. It has watched you pass beneath it. It has watched you in a way that the word watching does not quite capture, because watching implies a passivity that the quality of that gaze does not contain. And then, in the overwhelming majority of cases, it does nothing. It holds its position, or it moves away, or it simply disappears in the way that cats of all sizes disappear, as if the act of choosing not to be seen undoes the fact of ever having been visible. And you are left on the trail with your heart running ahead of you, asking the question that every person who has ever had that encounter eventually arrives at. Why didn't it attack? If you find these questions as compelling as I do, stay with me for this one, because what we are about to work through is one of the genuinely fascinating and underexplored behavioral puzzles in North American wildlife. Subscribe if this is the kind of thing you come here for, because we are going to go deep on this, deeper than the standard treatment, and we are going to be honest about what the data says, even when it is not entirely comfortable. The mountain lion, Puma concolor, is the most widely distributed wild terrestrial mammal in the Western Hemisphere. Its range spans from the Yukon in northwestern Canada to the southern tip of South America, encompassing desert, rainforest, grassland, chaparral, and alpine terrain. It is an animal of extraordinary adaptability, capable of hunting prey ranging from mice to moose, capable of surviving in habitat ranging from below sea level in California's interior valleys to above 14,000 feet in the Andes. It is the second largest cat in the Americas, after the jaguar, and in North America, it has no serious competitor for the title of apex felid predator. An adult male mountain lion in the American West will weigh between 130 and 180 pounds, measure 8 to 9 feet from nose to tail tip, and possess the musculature and bone structure of an animal built by millions of years of evolution to kill things considerably larger than itself. It hunts by ambush. It attacks from above or from behind. It drives its canine teeth into the skull or vertebrae of its prey with enough force to kill animals 5 or 6 times its own weight. It is, by any objective biological accounting, extremely capable of killing a human being. And yet, in the entire recorded history of North America, spanning from the earliest colonial records in the 1600s to the present day, mountain lions have killed approximately 27 people. 27 confirmed fatalities across 400 years, across a continent. You can count the number of people killed by lightning in a single bad storm year in the United States and exceed that number. You can look at the annual fatality statistics from domestic dog attacks in this country, which run between 30 and 50 deaths per year, and understand in an instant the scale of the disparity. Mountain lions share habitat with millions of human beings who recreate in their territory every year, and they kill, on average, fewer than one of them per decade. That rarity is not a statistical artifact. It is not a public relations construction deployed by wildlife agencies to keep people from panicking. It is a genuine biological reality that demands a genuine biological explanation, because an animal of this size and capability choosing not to attack the creatures it encounters with this consistency is not doing so by accident. Something specific is happening, and it is happening at the intersection of evolutionary history, learned behavior, prey recognition, and cost-benefit calculation in ways that are more complicated and more interesting than the standard explanation captures. To understand why mountain lions watch you without attacking, you have to begin with understanding how a mountain lion thinks about prey. Not in the anthropomorphic sense, not in the sense that a mountain lion deliberates or weighs options consciously the way a human being does, but in the deeper sense that predators have neurological and behavioral machinery that evolved specifically to identify, evaluate, and pursue prey, and that machinery is not a general-purpose threat assessment system. It is a specialized system built by millions of years of selection to recognize specific patterns in specific contexts. Mountain lions are not generalist killers. They are specialists that evolved on a continent populated by specific ungulate species, primarily deer, elk, bighorn sheep, pronghorn, and related animals, and their entire predatory toolkit, physical, sensory, behavioral, was optimized for hunting those animals in that ecological context. What this means in practice is that a mountain lion's prey recognition system is tuned to a set of signals that deer and elk produce, and that humans, in most circumstances, do not. It is not that a mountain lion cannot identify a human as a potential prey item in some abstract cognitive sense. It is that the full suite of signals a wild, conditioned mountain lion uses to initiate and complete the predatory sequence are not typically present in a human being behaving normally in its territory. The prey recognition system is a template, built from evolutionary programming and refined by individual learning and experience, and humans, in most encounter situations, do not fit the template well enough to trigger the complete predatory response. They are too large in some respects, and too strange in others. Their smell is wrong. Their movement patterns are different, and most critically, their behavior when they detect the lion is profoundly different from the behavior of any prey species the lion has evolved to hunt. This is where the behavioral picture becomes genuinely fascinating, because the specific ways in which human behavior diverges from prey animal behavior turn out to map almost exactly onto the behavioral signals that suppress the mountain lion's predatory response. When a deer detects a mountain lion, it does one of a small number of things. It freezes momentarily and then bolts, triggering the chase response in the lion. It alerts other members of its group and begins moving away rapidly. It may vocalize in specific ways. What it does not do is turn to face the predator directly, make prolonged eye contact, increase in apparent size by raising its arms, produce loud, low-frequency vocalizations directed at the lion, and hold its ground without attempting to flee. These are the things a human being does, instinctively and without any training, when it discovers a mountain lion watching it from a tree. And these things, it turns out, are almost perfectly constructed to suppress the predatory sequence in an animal whose prey recognition system was not built to process them. Direct eye contact is significant in ways that are worth dwelling on. For most predators, sustained direct eye contact from a potential prey animal is not a normal signal. Prey animals do not typically stare down predators. They detect them, panic, and run, or they stare briefly and then signal group alarm behavior. An animal that holds a predator's gaze calmly and with apparent deliberateness is communicating something that does not fit cleanly into the prey category. It is communicating awareness, control, and absence of fear in a way that is biologically anomalous for a prey species. Mountain lions, like most ambush predators, depend on a moment of unawareness or inattention to initiate the approach to attack range. An animal that is looking directly at them has eliminated that possibility. The tactical precondition for the attack is absent. The lion watches. It does not move. It reassesses. And in the vast majority of cases, it finds a reason to be somewhere else. The size-signaling behavior, raising your arms, opening your jacket, making yourself appear physically larger, interacts with the lion's prey size assessment in a related way. Mountain lions have a prey size preference that, while flexible, is calibrated around their natural ungulate prey. Animals at the upper end of deer size or above represent significant attack risk and caloric reward calculations that are more complex than those for smaller prey. An animal that suddenly appears larger than anticipated creates uncertainty in that calculation. Uncertainty in the cost-benefit analysis of an attack is not the same as a negative result, but it introduces hesitation that serves the human being's interests. The lion reassesses. The window for the kind of rapid, confident predatory commitment that mountain lion hunts require closes. The lion waits, watches, and the moment passes. The vocalization response is perhaps the most interesting element of the standard human behavioral repertoire during mountain lion encounters, because it appears to exploit a specific feature of how large felids process environmental information. Mountain lions are not silent predators in the sense that they don't hear. They are extraordinarily sensitive to sound, and their prey species produce specific acoustic signatures that form part of the prey recognition template. Loud, low-frequency, non-fear human vocalizations, shouting, clapping, banging trekking poles together, making sustained aggressive noise, do not match any acoustic pattern in a wild-conditioned mountain lion's prey template. They match something else, something that in the lion's learned experience category is associated with danger or disturbance rather than prey opportunity. A lion that has spent its life in territory that overlaps, even marginally, with human activity has learned that loud, assertive human sounds are associated with negative experiences or close calls. The acoustic profile of a shouting, aggressive human being is, for a wild-conditioned mountain lion, a signal that the cost of continued engagement is likely to exceed the benefit. The running behavior inverts all of this, and it inverts it in a direction that wildlife researchers and behavioral ecologists have documented with a consistency that is striking when you examine the encounter record carefully. Trail runners are statistically overrepresented in mountain lion encounter incidents relative to their proportion of the human population using mountain lion habitat. Hikers moving at walking pace have dramatically fewer close encounter incidents per hour of habitat use than runners moving at trail pace, even when you control for the terrain and time of day. The reason is not complicated when you examine it through the lens of mountain lion predatory neurology. A fleeing target activates the chase response in a mountain lion almost automatically, not because the mountain lion has assessed the fleeing human and decided it is prey, but because the neurological machinery that initiates pursuit is triggered by the visual and acoustic signature of rapid, rhythmic, forward-directed movement in a way that does not wait for complete assessment to occur. The stimulus arrives, the response begins, and the behavioral cascade follows, before the slower assessment processes have had time to modify it. This is why the cardinal rule of mountain lion encounters, a rule that wildlife agencies have maintained for decades across jurisdictions, is not to run. Not because running cannot be executed faster than a mountain lion's sprint, which it cannot. The lion can cover ground at roughly 50 miles per hour in short bursts, but because running changes the situation from one in which the lion is assessing a stationary or slow-moving anomalous stimulus to one in which the lion is responding to a fleeing target. And those are fundamentally different situations with fundamentally different behavioral outcomes. The lion that was watching you with mild, uncertain curiosity from the tree becomes, the moment you run, an animal responding to a movement pattern that evolution has wired it to pursue. The physiological underpinning of this chase response is worth understanding because it clarifies why the behavioral distinction between running and not running is so significant. Mountain lions are ambush predators. which means they have evolved for explosive short-range speed rather than sustained pursuit. Their cardiac and respiratory systems are optimized for the burst of the attack rather than the endurance of a chase. But the predatory drive, the neurological motivation to pursue a fleeing target, does not calculate distance or stamina requirements before engaging. It is triggered by the visual stimulus of flight and produces the pursuit response with a speed and automaticity that reflects its evolutionary importance. A deer that is fleeing is a deer that has detected the lion and is trying to escape, which means the opportunity window is closing, which means delay produces zero outcome rather than a delayed, positive outcome. The neural pathway that produces pursuit in response to flight is fast and strong for exactly this reason. And that same fast, strong pathway is triggered by a fleeing human with an indifference to species identity that is worth understanding if you ever find yourself deciding whether to run. Now, with all of that established, with the biological reasons for mountain lion non-aggression toward humans laid out in their real and documented complexity, it becomes possible to address the part of this picture that the rarity statistic does not capture well, and that the standard public communications around mountain lion safety have been, for understandable but not entirely satisfying reasons, somewhat careful to articulate clearly. The mountain lion is watching you from that tree and choosing not to attack because of a specific set of conditions that define the overwhelming majority of human mountain lion encounters. But those conditions are not fixed. They are not permanent features of the human-mountain lion relationship that will hold regardless of how the landscape and the behavioral profiles of the animals involved change, and they are changing. The attack record in North America, the 27 confirmed fatalities, and the larger number of non-fatal attacks that the historical documentation captures is not a flat line across 4 centuries. It is a line that has been rising, slowly, not dramatically, not in a way that fundamentally revises the statistical picture of mountain lion encounters as extremely low risk, but consistently enough that independent researchers examining the trend have reached conclusions that diverge from the reassuring language of official wildlife communications. Documented mountain lion attacks on humans have increased since the 1970s. The increase persists when you control for the growth of the mountain lion population and the expansion of the human recreational footprint in mountain lion habitat. It is not simply a function of more lions meeting more people. Something about the nature of the encounters is changing, and understanding what is changing requires understanding the process of habituation and its consequences in the specific ecological context of the contemporary American West. Habituation is the reduction of a behavioral response through repeated, unreinforced exposure to a stimulus. It is one of the most basic forms of learning in the animal kingdom, present in organisms from sea slugs to great apes, and it produces reliable behavioral change through a mechanism that requires no cognitive deliberation. An animal that encounters a particular stimulus repeatedly without negative consequence learns, at the level of neural association, that the stimulus does not predict danger. The behavioral response, in this case, the mountain lion's wariness and avoidance response toward human beings, diminishes. This is not a sudden change. It is a gradient. The lion that has spent 6 months moving through a peri-urban canyon system in Southern California, moving past hiking trails and crossing roads and resting in drainage corridors within earshot of residential streets, is not the same behavioral animal as a lion in a remote wilderness drainage that has had no contact with human activity. Its wariness buffer, the distance at which it registers human presence as a signal to withdraw, has been shrinking with each uneventful exposure. It has not recategorized humans as prey, but it has recategorized them as less threatening than a wild conditioned animal would, and that recategorization changes the encounter dynamics in ways that matter. The GPS collar data from mountain lion studies in high human overlap areas, particularly the extensive data sets produced by long-term research projects in the Santa Ana Mountains and the Santa Monica Mountains of Southern California, shows what habituated mountain lion behavior actually looks like in spatial and temporal terms. These animals are moving through developed areas with a fluency and a comfort that wild conditioned animals in remote terrain do not exhibit. They are crossing multi-lane roads, moving through horse properties, resting within hundreds of meters of occupied residential structures, conducting hunts in areas where the ambient light from residential development is visible from the kill site. They are doing these things not as emergency responses to habitat pressure or navigational errors. They are doing them as routine features of their movement ecology in the landscapes they inhabit. The interface between their daily lives and human activity is not an occasional zone of contact. It is the texture of their existence. What the habituation process produces at the interface between mountain lion behavior and human safety risk is a set of conditions that the rarity statistic, computed across the entire population of mountain lion encounters, does not adequately capture. The rarity is real as a population-level description of mountain lion predatory behavior toward humans. It is less relevant as a predictor of risk in specific encounters with specific animals in specific contexts. The lion watching you from the tree in a remote wilderness drainage that has never been in close proximity to human activity is an animal whose behavioral inhibitions regarding humans are fully intact. Its wariness buffer is wide. Its prey template is built exclusively from wild prey species. Its assessment of the cost-benefit calculation of attacking a human being is strongly weighted toward the conclusion that the cost is high and uncertain and the benefit is speculative. The lion watching you from the tree above a trail in the Santa Ana Mountains, a trail that cuts through a drainage the lion uses as a movement corridor between a deer hunting area and a rest site, an animal that has been moving through this terrain for 2 years without a single negative interaction with human beings, is a different calculation. Not a certain threat, not even a likely threat, but a different calculation. The factors that modify the habituation-driven risk in the direction of actual attack are the ones that the incident record, examined carefully and honestly, identifies with notable consistency. Nutritional stress is the most important. A mountain lion that is hungry, genuinely and substantially hungry, in the way that a young dispersing male pushed into marginal territory by competition from residents becomes hungry, or the way that an animal in a drought year, when deer populations have declined, becomes hungry, is an animal whose selectivity about prey has been reduced by physiological urgency. Hunger does not make a habituated lion decide that humans are prey. It reduces the threshold at which the prey recognition system will accept a less-than-perfect match. The behavioral signals that a normal, well-nourished, wild-conditioned lion would reject as insufficient to trigger the predatory sequence become more compelling to an animal whose caloric reserves are depleted. The combination of reduced wariness from habituation and reduced selectivity from hunger is the specific configuration that appears with striking regularity in the histories of mountain lions that have attacked humans. The demographic context within which this combination most frequently arises is also consistent across the incident record. Young males, specifically subadult males between the ages of approximately 1 and 3 years, are dramatically overrepresented in attack incidents relative to their proportion of the population. This is not surprising when you understand the biology of mountain lion dispersal. Subadult males are produced in resident female home ranges, where they spend the first year to year and a half of their lives learning to hunt under the indirect influence of their mother's behavior. When they disperse, they move into unfamiliar territory, where they must establish themselves against resident males who will actively exclude them from the best hunting areas. The dispersal process is energetically expensive and often nutritionally precarious. Young males in dispersal frequently end up in the marginal habitat at the edges of established territories, which, in the contemporary American West, is often peri-urban terrain. They arrive there already nutritionally stressed from the energetic demands of dispersal. They encounter human-dominated landscape features that they have no experience with and no learned wariness about. And they begin the habituation process in a context where their physiological state makes prey selectivity reduction most likely. They are the most dangerous demographic in the mountain lion population, not because they are larger or stronger than adult males. They are not. But because the circumstances of their life stage most reliably produce the specific combination of habituation and nutritional stress that elevates attack risk. The spatial pattern of high-risk encounter areas reflects this demographic reality with a precision that becomes visible when you map incident data against landscape features. The highest risk zones are not the deepest wilderness areas where mountain lion density is highest. They are the edges, the peri-urban interfaces, the drainage corridors that penetrate residential development, the trail systems at the boundary between suburban open space and undeveloped wildland. These are the places where dispersing subadults accumulate, because they are the territories that resident males have not claimed, where human activity is frequent enough that habituation can proceed rapidly, and where the prey base is sometimes a patchwork of wild deer and domestic animals that supports a flexible predator's caloric needs imperfectly but well enough to survive. This is the geography of elevated mountain lion encounter risk in the contemporary American West, and it is a geography that is expanding as human development continues to penetrate and fragment mountain lion habitat across the region. The children dimension of this picture is the one that demands the most honest and careful treatment, because it sits at the intersection of the hardest biological realities and the most emotionally fraught territory in the human-wildlife coexistence conversation. Of the 27 confirmed mountain lion fatalities in North American recorded history, children are represented at rates that substantially exceed their proportion of the population recreating in mountain lion habitat. The biological explanation for this overrepresentation is not comfortable, but it is clear. A child between the ages of 3 and 10 falls within the size range of the ungulate prey that constitutes the core of a mountain lion's diet across most of its range. A child between those ages exhibits behavioral patterns, rapid and erratic movement, high-pitched vocalizations, inability to execute the confrontational behavioral response that suppresses predatory behavior, limited capacity to fight back effectively if an attack begins, that are more consistent with prey behavioral templates than adult human behavior is. A child running and shouting on a trail in mountain lion habitat is producing a behavioral signature that is meaningfully closer to prey than an adult hiking calmly is. And for a habituated lion whose prey recognition threshold has been reduced by nutritional stress, that difference is not academic. Wildlife agency communications in the jurisdictions with the most intensive human mountain lion overlap have been shifting on this point. The language about children in mountain lion territory is becoming more specific and more emphatic in official guidance from California, Colorado, Washington, and British Columbia than it was a decade ago. Recommendations that children not play in outdoor areas adjacent to wildland habitat without adult supervision, guidance that was previously limited to specific high-incident zones, have expanded to cover broader geographic areas in recent official communications. Guidance about the specific hours of highest risk, dawn, dusk, and darkness, has become more detailed. The behavioral protocols for adults accompanying children in mountain lion habitat have become more explicit and more prescriptive. These are not panic responses, they are calibrations. They reflect what the incident data is showing in terms of changing encounter profiles, and they tell you something about what wildlife managers are observing that is not being communicated as clearly as the boilerplate about extreme rarity that accompanies every official statement on the subject. The domestic dog question runs parallel to the children question in interesting ways that illuminate how mountain lions assess and categorize potential prey in peri-urban environments. Dogs are present in mountain lion habitat in large numbers. They move in ways that are more consistent with prey behavioral templates than human movement is. They are sized in a range that overlaps substantially with mountain lion prey preferences, and they lack the behavioral repertoire of confrontational display that deters predatory responses in human beings. A large dog on a trail, even a dog that is on a leash, presents a different behavioral profile to a mountain lion than the human holding the leash. The incident record for dog attacks in mountain lion territory is considerably larger than the incident record for human attacks, and it shows the same geographic concentration in peri-urban interface areas and the same demographic concentration in young, nutritionally stressed lions that the human attack record shows. Dogs taken by mountain lions in suburban open space and trail corridor areas are the most visible leading indicator of elevated human encounter risk in those areas, not because dog attacks predict human attacks in any simple mechanical way, but because the conditions that produce dog predation in peri-urban terrain are the same conditions that elevate human attack risk in the same terrain. The decision-making of wildlife managers about when and how to intervene in response to reported mountain lion activity in peri-urban areas is constrained by a combination of legal, political, and ecological factors that produce outcomes that independent researchers find not always adequate to the risk conditions they are designed to address. The legal framework for wildlife management in most Western jurisdictions treats mountain lions as a protected game species whose management must be conducted within a regulatory structure that balances conservation goals with public safety. The political environment around mountain lion management, particularly in California, where the species enjoys the protection of a voter-initiated hunting ban and a powerful constituency of wildlife advocates, makes aggressive management responses to habituation situations complex to execute and difficult to communicate publicly. The practical result is a management posture that defaults to the least interventionist response consistent with the immediate public safety situation. Individual animals that demonstrate clear and documented predatory behavior toward humans, specifically predatory stalking of a person or a predatory attack, are typically killed by wildlife managers. Animals that demonstrate elevated habituation but have not yet made predatory contact with a human are frequently monitored rather than removed. The gap between where intervention occurs and where it might be most effective from a preventive standpoint is the gap that independent researchers keep returning to in the technical literature on mountain lion conflict management. By the time an animal has demonstrated predatory behavior toward a human that justifies removal under the existing regulatory framework, it has typically already been in the process of losing its wariness of humans for an extended period. The behavioral transition from habituated but non-threatening to actively dangerous is not instantaneous. It is a gradient that unfolds over months or years, and the point on that gradient where wildlife agencies can intervene most effectively to prevent the final transition to predatory behavior may be significantly earlier than the point at which existing protocols authorize action. The question of whether preventive removal of highly habituated individuals, particularly young males in peri-urban areas showing signs of nutritional stress, should be more aggressively pursued as a public safety measure, is genuinely contested among wildlife managers and conservation researchers, and that contestation has not been resolved in the management policies of any major jurisdiction. It sits in the uncomfortable middle ground between precautionary public safety logic and the conservation values that govern wild predator management, and it will be resolved, eventually, by more incident data rather than by a philosophical breakthrough. The tree specifically deserves attention in this discussion, because the tree is where the encounter begins, in many of the most instructive incidents in the documented record. And the tree is where the behavioral complexity of the watching without attacking dynamic is most directly visible. Mountain lions rest in trees for extended periods. They cache prey in trees to protect it from scavengers and return to it over multiple feeding sessions. They use elevated positions for surveillance of trails and clearings below, a behavior that reflects their ambush predator's instinct to maximize positional advantage before committing to movement. When a mountain lion is in a tree above a trail and a human passes beneath it, the lion is in a position of complete tactical advantage. It is above the human, concealed or partially concealed, at a range from which it could complete an attack before the human had time to respond. This is precisely the configuration that mountain lion predatory behavior has evolved to exploit, and in the overwhelming majority of such encounters, the lion does not move. It watches, it assesses, it holds its position, and the human passes or the human looks up, and the encounter enters a different phase, but the attack does not come. Why does the attack not come in that moment of maximum tactical advantage? The answer is the answer that runs through the entire picture we have been building, but it becomes sharpest when it is applied to the tree scenario specifically. The lion in the tree is running its assessment of the human below against its prey template. The human is walking, not fleeing. The human may be making normal human sounds, conversation, footsteps, equipment sounds. The human smells wrong. The human's movement pattern is wrong. If the human looks up and makes eye contact, the behavioral signals diverge even more dramatically from prey template expectations. The lion is receiving information that does not add up to a green light for attack initiation. It is also calculating, at the level of the unconscious cost-benefit machinery that drives predatory decisions, that a prey item that has detected it and is now looking directly at it is not the same proposition as a prey item that is unaware of its existence. The ambush advantage has been reduced or eliminated by detection. The risk calculation shifts. The lion holds. The lion watches. The lion waits for a better configuration, and in the vast majority of cases, a better configuration does not arise before the opportunity passes. The exceptions are what the incident record is built from, and examining the exceptions carefully reveals the pattern that the aggregate rarity obscures. The person attacked from a tree in a documented mountain lion incident almost always fits a profile that differs from the person who walks below the same tree and continues unmolested. They are alone. They are running. They are a child. The encounter is occurring at dusk or dawn, when ambient light conditions favor the lion's sensory system over the human's. The lion involved is subsequently identified as young, nutritionally stressed, or behaviorally unusual. These variables are not independent of each other. They cluster in ways that reflect the structural conditions that produce elevated attack risk, peri-urban habituation, nutritional stress in dispersing subadults, recreational patterns that put vulnerable individuals in vulnerable situations during vulnerable times. The attack from the tree is the outcome at the end of a long causal chain that begins with landscape conditions and behavioral ecology and proceeds through individual animal history and situational specifics to the moment when the assessment process in the lion produces a different result than it produces in 999 out of 1,000 similar situations. The California situation merits extended treatment because it is the most thoroughly documented version of the human-mountain lion interface problem, and because the decisions that have been made and not made in California over the past 30 years have produced a case study whose lessons extend far beyond a single state. The mountain lion hunting ban, passed by California voters in 1990 as Proposition 117, was a conservation measure that achieved its conservation objective. Mountain lion populations in California grew substantially in the 3 decades following the ban. Estimates of the current California mountain lion population range from 4,000 to 6,000 animals, making it the largest mountain lion population of any jurisdiction in the contiguous United States. The ban also accelerated the process of human mountain lion interface development in a state where human population growth and sprawl were already pressing deeper into wildland habitat, because the growing mountain lion population was meeting an expanding human footprint without the management lever that regulated hunting provides for redistributing animal behavior through risk conditioning. This is a point that requires careful handling, because it sits at the intersection of genuine conservation values and genuine public safety analysis, and the two do not always align neatly. Regulated hunting of mountain lions, as practiced in states that maintain it, does not primarily function as population control in the way that hunting of ungulate species functions. Mountain lions are K-selected predators, with relatively low reproductive rates, small litter sizes, and extended juvenile dependency periods. They are not a species whose population dynamics are dominated by the kind of annual surplus production that harvest management is designed to address in deer and elk. What regulated hunting of mountain lions does do, and what the evidence from states with regulated hunting programs suggests it does effectively, is maintain behavioral wariness of humans in the population through the mechanism of risk conditioning. Mountain lions in populations that experience hunting pressure are more wary of humans, maintain larger behavioral buffers around human activity, and are less likely to habituate to human presence than lions in unhunted populations. The mechanism is the same mechanism that produces habituation in the absence of negative consequence, run in reverse. Negative consequences, the presence of humans in the landscape being associated with risk, produce and maintain wariness rather than eliminating it. California's situation is not one that admits a simple policy prescription, and the purpose of raising it here is not to argue for any specific management approach. It is to make visible the connection between management decisions made in the political and legal framework of wildlife governance and the behavioral outcomes that those decisions produce in a wild predator population. The mountain lions of the Santa Ana Mountains are not more aggressive or more dangerous than the mountain lions of the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana, because of any intrinsic biological difference. They are different behavioral animals because they have been shaped by different experiences, different histories of human interaction, different landscapes with different levels of human activity and human threat. The management framework that produced those different experiences is a human creation, and it is subject to revision by human decision-making. What form that revision should take is a question that deserves honest public deliberation, rather than the silence that results from wildlife agencies defaulting to reassuring language about rarity, while independently adjusting their guidance to reflect conditions that the rarity language does not adequately describe. The wildlife corridor question connects the landscape management dimension to the behavioral ecology dimension in a way that is worth making explicit because it is often discussed in purely conservation terms. Genetic diversity, population connectivity, range expansion, without fully articulating its relevance to the behavioral risk picture that produces attacks. Mountain lion populations that are demographically closed by habitat fragmentation and impassable barriers accumulate population pressure in ways that amplified encounter risk. When dispersing subadults cannot move out of saturated territories into new range, they accumulate in the marginal habitat at the edges of the territorial grid. In the contemporary American West, that marginal habitat is very frequently peri-urban terrain. The young males who cannot establish themselves in wildland territories end up in the suburban canyon systems and open space corridors at the edges of cities, where the conditions for habituation and nutritional stress combine in the configuration that the attack record identifies as highest risk. wildlife crossing structures, overpasses, and underpasses that allow animals to move safely across transportation barriers, address this problem at the landscape scale by reopening the dispersal pathways that fragmentation has closed. A young male lion that can disperse through a wildlife crossing from the Santa Ana Mountains into the San Jacinto Mountains, or from the Santa Monica Mountains into the Santa Susana Mountains, is a lion that is not accumulating in peri-urban terrain, not habituating to suburban conditions, not being nutritionally stressed by competition in a closed population. The crossing structure is not primarily a romantic gesture toward wildlife connectivity, though it is that too. It is a piece of public safety infrastructure in a very literal and pragmatic sense. The lions that it allows to disperse are lions that are not going to be in the drainage behind the subdivision in 2 years. That relationship between landscape infrastructure and behavioral risk is not widely understood by the public, and it is not widely communicated by the agencies and advocacy organizations that support crossing construction, partly because the public safety framing is seen as a politically complicated way to advocate for a project that the conservation framing handles more cleanly. The trail running community, and more broadly the entire outdoor recreation community that uses mountain lion habitat intensively, exists in a specific relationship to the risk picture we have been describing that is worth examining directly. Trail running has grown explosively as a recreational category in the United States over the past 15 years. The participant base has expanded dramatically. The geographic scope of the sport has expanded into terrain that previously saw very limited human recreational use, and the temporal patterns of use, including early morning and evening runs that extend into the highest risk periods for mountain lion encounters, have pushed more runners into more high-risk scenarios than existed in the historical baseline. The statistical risk per participant hour of trail running in mountain lion habitat remains extremely low. It is also higher than the statistical risk per participant hour of hiking in the same terrain, and the gap has been documented consistently enough across incident data from multiple jurisdictions that it cannot be attributed to random variation. The community's relationship to this documented risk differential has been, broadly speaking, one of emphasis on the population-level rarity, rather than engagement with the encounter-specific factors that elevate individual risk. This is a normal and psychologically understandable response to probabilistic risk information about a valued activity. People do not generally restructure their recreational lives around low-probability threats. They are more likely to accept the risk than to modify the behavior that creates it, particularly when the modification required, running with a partner, carrying a deterrent, avoiding high-risk time windows, imposes real costs on the experience they are seeking. The appeal of trail running is substantially constituted by exactly the things that the risk reduction guidance asks you to reduce: solitude, speed, freedom of movement in remote terrain at the hours when the light is most beautiful. The guidance asks you to trade those things for a marginal improvement in a risk that is already very low. And the trade does not make psychological sense to most people, even when it makes statistical sense. This is not a criticism of the trail running community. It is a description of human risk psychology that applies universally. What it means for the practical management of mountain lion encounter risk in the recreation context is that behavioral guidance alone, even accurate and well-communicated behavioral guidance, is not going to substantially change the encounter risk profile of the recreation community. The risk reduction that matters will have to come from the landscape and management side, from corridor infrastructure that reduces the accumulation of habituated peri-urban lions, from management frameworks that address habituation before it reaches the predatory threshold rather than responding after it has, and from land use planning that thoughtfully considers where the highest intensity trail use intersects with the highest density mountain lion activity in ways that can be addressed through design rather than behavioral instruction. The detection question is one of the most practically relevant and least discussed dimensions of this entire picture. How often do mountain lions watch people from trees without the people knowing? The answer, based on what we know about mountain lion behavior, their sensory capabilities, their movement patterns, and the terrain they inhabit, is very often. GPS collar data from mountain lion research projects has repeatedly shown that collared lions spend significant time in the immediate vicinity of busy trails and recreational corridors without ever producing a visual encounter or a human report. The lions know where the trails are. They are aware of the humans on them. They are making decisions about how to position themselves relative to human activity in ways that reflect both their wariness and their familiarity with human movement patterns. The image of a mountain lion watching you from above without your knowledge is not a dramatic hypothetical. For anyone who spends significant time in mountain lion habitat, it is almost certainly something that has happened, probably multiple times. This reality should not produce paranoia, because the lion that watches you without your knowledge and allows you to pass without incident is demonstrating exactly the behavioral inhibition that defines the species' normal relationship to human beings. The lion watching you from above and choosing not to act is not a near miss. It is the system working as it should. It is the behavioral complex of prey assessment, cost-benefit calculation, and predatory risk evaluation producing the outcome that it produces in the overwhelming majority of encounters. A wild predator and a human being sharing a landscape without violence. The fact that the watching happens invisibly, that you are almost never aware of being observed, does not make it sinister. It makes it a feature of what it means to move through terrain that is genuinely wild, genuinely inhabited by large predators that have their own needs and their own assessments and their own calculations about the cost of action. What should concern you, not alarm you, but concern you in the calibrated way that intelligent people think about actual risk landscapes, is the subset of conditions under which that calculation produces a different result. Being alone, moving fast, being out at dawn or dusk in areas of known high mountain lion activity, bringing children into peri-urban wildland areas without appropriate supervision and awareness, moving through terrain that wildlife incident data has flagged as having elevated mountain lion activity associated with habituation, carrying no deterrent, being unaware of what mountain lion stalking behavior looks like, because mountain lions that are moving into a predatory engagement do not announce themselves in ways that are visually obvious to an untrained observer, but they do produce behavioral signals that people who know what to look for can sometimes identify. A lion following your trail at distance, maintaining parallel movement to yours through vegetation, appearing in a location ahead of you that it should not have reached without crossing your line of sight. These are the signals that wildlife managers and experienced field researchers describe as precursors to predatory engagement, and they are signals that the recreational user of mountain lion habitat is almost never trained to recognize. The practical toolkit for moving through mountain lion habitat in a way that respects both the rarity of genuine risk and the existence of the conditions that elevate that risk is not complicated, but it requires actually knowing it rather than relying on the ambient sense that mountain lion attacks are so rare that no specific preparation is needed. Do not hike or run alone in high-activity mountain lion areas if you have a choice. In peri-urban interface areas specifically, the buddy system is not an aesthetic preference. It is a genuine risk reduction measure with documented efficacy in the encounter record. Carry something that makes noise and be willing to use it. Air horns, trekking poles that you are willing to hit together loudly. A strong human voice directed at the lion without running. These